And I thought it would be fun to title this Is Theory Bullshit? And I thought it would be really fun to do it at the exact same time that I am recording episode 1 for a series where I talk about philosophy and theory and theorists and books and stuff like that. Sometimes these will be live. Sometimes these will not be live. Best thing of all, though, they will all be available on podcast form, because up until now, I've not taken my podcast seriously enough. And due to recent, in the last couple of years, recent realizations that have come along, the series is made for people who are busy and getting interested in understanding what I'm into, or interested in something someone else is into. Because obviously, if you heard about theory, you heard about it from others. And so you thought, what is that? When people say, read theory, or don't read theory, or it's a meme, or it's funny, or it's not, it's annoying. Who knows? It's pretentious. There's all kinds of associated baggage with the term theory. I don't really like anymore that my name is Theory Plebe in a sort of way. So to the point where I thought about changing the podcast's name. So it wouldn't just be Theory Plebe, it would be something else. I mean, I would go as Theory Plebe. I would be going by Theory Plebe. But I thought about doing a different podcast title because the word theory is problematic. And I mean, that's the most theoretical thing you can say. In a sort of sense, most theorists are pretty critical and think about the meanings of words a lot. Well, I think anybody who uses the word theory, or for instance, this is related, someone who studies philosophy, will inevitably run up on people asking all the time, like, what is that? And so I'm not doing this for the people who are already super into it, though, of course, there are going to be some of you here as well. The Dangerous Maybes in the chat, for instance, right now. But he's going to be busy tonight, but he'll listen to this later because it's in podcast form. Point being, I've got people who I am in discussion groups with in real life as well as online. And then I've got people who reach out to me now and will ask me, where should I start? I mean, okay, there's some people who just don't want to do theory. They know they don't want to do theory. And that's okay too. I mean, I don't know why you're here, except you might at least just be like, well, I might not want to do theory, but I would at least be interested in hearing someone like explain like what that means when people talk about that. Now, I'm not sure that I'm the best person to be telling you anything about what's what. I don't really know. Oh, by the way, what's on the screen right now? This book, Hitler's Bureaucrats. It's a book that I'm checking out because I'm doing a lot of World War II history right now. But here up on the screen, I just changed it over to the sort of outline for today. One of the important things that I have here is if you missed the beginning, for people on YouTube specifically, and a lot of people will be getting here late, then just go back to the beginning, speed it up so you can catch up with the live stream. Podcast people don't have to worry about that. Anyway, bringing it back around though to the topic of the day, theory, and the word bullshit, and whether or not these two things are related. Well, if you are interested in theory, well, then I will help you with this. I at least want to give you a sense for what theory is. If we just look up the word theory on Google, for instance, it would say a supposition or a system of ideas intended to explain something, especially one based on general principles independent of the thing to be explained. And then there's like two kind of examples here, or kind of variants of the definition. It goes, a set of principles on which the practice of an activity is based. A set of principles on which the practice of an activity is based. So obviously, when we're talking about theory and praxis, and people who would prefer praxis, and a lot of the people who aren't interested in theory at all are kind of like getting into activism or some other form of praxis. And there's always some people who just want to talk theory who don't want to be involved. And so if you just want to be smashing things, those people can seem annoying and get in the way. And so that is why there's some like bad blood in one way. Other ways would include things like just general anti-intellectualism in this country. A lot of that is very justified because most of the people who use theory, much less just intellectual sounding jargon, are themselves people who think that they are above essential labor just because they're a geek. And now, because they did well, a geek who's good at getting grades. So a geek who's good at getting grades doesn't think that they have to do real work, and they're going to use big words. And then there would be people who say, well, that's not fair. In any kind of specialization, there's going to be jargon because that makes it easier to communicate for people who have to communicate about these things all the time without reducing it down to a 5th grade reading, like intellect level, reading comprehension level. For people who are trying to master some discourse, like there's going to inevitably be a lot of that. And I end up defending difficult writing and hard ideas, the kind of stuff that, like the kinds of books, like right here, I'm holding Totality and Infinity by Emmanuel Levinas, or Being in Time by Martin Heidegger, or the Phenomenology of Mind or Spirit by Hegel. Like these kinds of books set the stage for what later comes as critical theory, which starts with the Frankfurt School and then turns into critical theories later, which we'll get into as well. I don't think that the definition theory is enough though, because there are scientific theories, there are folk theories, meaning that there's just like street wisdom, ideas about how to do things. There's non-formalized kinds of theories. We internalize certain practices. For instance, one of the lowercase critical theories that comes later on and is more contemporary would be gender theory, or feminism, or queer theory, or critical race theory is an example. I mean, it's kind of a variant. It's less attached to the rest of these kind of categories than one might think. If you read, say, the critical race theory reader, it's very, very, very different from like almost any other kind of theory, because it is so based in specifically American legal institutions and critique of those legal institutions, whereas more like queer theory, gender theory, these things are more usually a lot more literary. Okay, they're a lot more based in like critiquing literature, because the way that theory has developed, and I know we still haven't talked about like what theory really is in the sense that we're using it here, and we'll get into that, but the way that theory has developed in the United States has been through literature departments on university campuses, as well as in and really then it's only some literature classes, and then in some sociology classes. And ultimately, and this is I think the general state of academia today, is that theory does not have a department on campus. Theory is a thing people get together to talk about online or in conferences. And then usually those people attending those conferences or talking about it online are themselves like isolated from other people, and that they're going online or they're going to conferences in order to connect with other people who are interested in theory. The departments on university campuses are not very theoretical, especially like in the humanities, especially in, well, okay, I can't speak too broadly. I want to speak carefully. I don't want to denigrate unnecessarily, but let's just limit it. Some of what I'm saying so far definitely applies to all universities, but I will reel it back in for this next thing to say, at least on my campus, when I finally went to college, which, I mean, we'll get into whether college is important or not like later, but when I finally went, there was no such thing as theory. You couldn't just, later I found people who are technically doing theory, or they're like, they're teaching theory, but they were like the odd ducks in their departments, teaching special selections or special topics courses, or, they're teaching a 101 class, and then they would bring in a little bit of theory. I remember, for instance, a film appreciation class, and that professor was like the chair of the humanities department or college or whatever it was. And I remember him talking about semiotics and signifiers and Foucault. And we read a few pages from The Order of Things. And he was emphatically on the whiteboard, like circling signifier, signified with a line between. I did not know what that meant. And I was just like, what is he talking about? I can't even make sense of it. And so one of the pet peeves a lot of people have with theory circles and is, whether you're going to conferences or if it's online, is that, people, it seems like they're talking another language. And so, it makes sense to eye that with suspicion. And when time, energy, and attention are also limited, it's really easy to just be like, really? Do I really need to care about that? Like, that's 100 years old. Like, do I really care about something 100 years old? I don't even know what's happening in the world right now. It's so crazy. And you're telling me I need to care about ideas from 100 years ago, much less like 2,000 years ago? Like, really? And, maybe not for everybody, but, and ultimately, just quick caveat, if theory is pointless, then it's a lot of fun. And, if it is literally pointless and we're just LARPing, then that's okay. It is still a lot of fun. And it's an interesting way to learn about science and art and, philosophy, because theory and theorists, whether, we're talking about Deleuze or Derrida, or Adorno or any of these other, galaxy brain, thinkers, they always had their feet in multiple worlds, octopus style, like they were in so many different fields of knowledge. And if theory is supposed to be some kind of methodological or systematic or at least rigorous way of trying to understand how things fit together so that we can develop general principles and rules of thumb from which to then guide our action, then they're going to necessarily be developed by polymaths. And polymaths are people who do, they keep studying math and science and different languages and linguistics or semiotics, psychology, sociology, anthropology. Physics. It's like when you read these people and they're kind of working in the middle of like all of these fields that they've been studying their whole lives, it's overwhelming and you feel outside of it, of course, Now, in a sort of sense, we're always outside of so many things that we don't know, but there are specific discourses and, more importantly, fields of knowledge that have been developed or that have been happening over the last few hundred years, especially, where more and more people are having the ability to communicate, to become literate. But at the same time, we are over inundated by people who are trying to distract us with advertising and propaganda. And even people who really believe in truth often believe that they have to deceive us in order to somehow get to some deeper truth, or they have to deceive us in order to get us to do the right things. And that means people who love us think that. That means that people who love us or that we love may have themselves been deceived. In a sort of sense, theory is one of the tools in a toolkit for the task of deprogramming oneself from ideology. But at the same time, theory becomes a tool of ideology. And there will be theorists who argue that ideology is something you can't get out of, and you just got to have a better than worse ideology, and then understand that your ideology that is hopefully better is going to be one that can self-correct over time, and that you will remain somewhat critical of it, especially just in terms of the kinds of negative effects that can come with ideology. More importantly, the kind of there are human weaknesses that ideology preys upon. And these can be things like wanting to feel superior than other people, wanting to feel like you're righteous, wanting to get the rush of having done something good without actually having done anything. These are all things that we are susceptible to as subjects of ideology in a society where there's always an ongoing war of ideas, not just from two sides of the aisle, but from thousands in a sort of sense. The marketplace of ideas, as they say, it's really the marketplace of ideologies. And those are warring it out, but they're not necessarily committed to truth or justice. And then even when they are, like I said, they will often think that, well, because we're drafting this stuff up for people who are dumb and people who we're really just trying to get them to go in the right direction that we already see, we're going to write this thing that we're not entirely sure about or that we don't really believe, all because we're trying to get the movement for whatever it is that, we believe like underway. Now, in times of war and in times of crisis, that's justified. And in a sort of sense, there is an ongoing crisis and an ongoing war, and especially depending on which ideologies like you hold to. There are ideologies that are always in a state of explicit war. And then there are ones that you don't even feel like you're an ideology. Okay, so I've said that word a lot. What does that mean, bleep? Ideology is, it's just a system of ideas or principles that a person believes or that is supposed to guide a person's action, right? It often gets associated with worldview. So how is that different from ideology? How's ideology different from theory? The way that I am thinking about it, and once again, I don't know if I'm the right person to be coming to for all these things. I will be recommending a bunch of channels that I think are really good places to get started. And you might, in no particular order. But I want to have this sort of meta conversation about it before sending you off, presuming that you're new to theory. Want to talk a little bit more before sending you to any of these channels, because though I love the work that is being done in these worlds, it feels weird for the people in my life to just, oh, you're interested in a thing, here, let me send you a video for something else. It's like, no, I need to actually kind of preface that. So am I the right person to be talking about this? Well, quick thing about background, and feel free to in the chat share your background, how you got into theory, if you got into theory. If you don't know what it is, ask questions. If you have any questions, I'm curious to know what kinds of words people associate theory with, and what their past or present kinds of conceptions of theory are. So feel free to share anything along those lines. But I'll tell you a little bit about my background. Just probably what you need to know is that I've been studying philosophy now since the fall of 2012. I didn't go to college fresh out of high school because I didn't go to high school because I was homeschooled in a weird kind of sense. And I was kind of straight out into the workforce before I was even 18. And then I spent, and when I say like homeschool, I think that a lot of really great things came along with that, as well as things that I don't love. But at the end of the day, I think there were definite benefits to not having a formal education at a young age. But at the same time, I mean, who knows? That's up to debate, and we'll only know in retrospect. But it was weird not ever being in a formal education environment until college. And it was weirder because I had at that point already spent years in the workforce. And when I say years in the workforce, I mean like I worked for 2 years as a night stalker, graveyard shift at a grocery store. And I worked for 2 years doing insulation, which, by the way, is a great way to make a lot of money really fast, as long as you can stick with it and you're not too bothered by fiberglass being all over your body, which is basically, I mean, it's not as bad as it used to be. Fiberglass that they tear out of homes that was installed in the 70s is super itchy, but this stuff nowadays really isn't that bad. And I did that for a couple of years. I worked at fast food places. I worked at sit-down restaurants. I worked at, I did drywall. I did roofing. I did foundations. I did all kinds of stuff. And so I'd done all of that before college. And my main thing was, I mean, I loved music. I loved the music scene. And that was what I did on my off time, was hang out with those people. And I was really uninterested in philosophy, but I didn't even know what the word meant, to be fair. I mainly just wasn't interested in having intellectual conversations. We'll put it that way. I really would avoid them. And if people were talking about politics, I usually tried to keep out of it because I was just kind of like, I don't know what they're talking about. I don't care. And in a sort of sense, I was running away from my past and not wanting to think about the things that I'd been told that I had to believe in, or I would go to hell, or, you know, whatever. There's all kinds of things that we get told that we have to believe. And, you know, that's like explicit ideology. And then you go, I don't like this. And I don't need to think about it philosophically to debunk it. I don't need theory. I just don't like it. And I'm going to go over there and not hang out with these people. And I will be doing my own thing. Peace. And that, you know, so I sympathize because I did it for a long time. But I was also, you know, trying to make up for lost time because I had not been able to party until I left home. And so I'm trying to party and do the music scene thing. And
my name is Dave, and I like to party.
It's a mode of life that is aesthetic in Kierkegaard's sense, the aesthetic life. Meaning you're living on the surface of things and kind of just pursuing both pleasure and enjoyment. And it's, you know, it's valid, but it's, you know, it's usually considered a phase. And I definitely didn't think it was at the time. But sure enough, like later on, I realized I can't keep drinking like this. And eventually I just quit drinking because I couldn't reel it in enough. And so I just eventually quit that. And a lot of times when someone quits something that they did during their like not working hours, they lose a lot of friends. And that definitely kind of comes with the territory. But the nice thing about the quitting drinking was that I had just started school, college. And I went in for a forest service. I was going to just do something practical, a degree. But I signed up for some electives. For people who've never been to college, an elective is just a class that you don't have to take for your major, but that, I mean, you have to take some electives, but there's a lot of different electives to choose from. And so I took a class on psychology. I took a class on, it was like an English essay writing class. And I took, besides like math, which I had a lot of remedial math I had to do, I was able to take a political philosophy class. Political philosophy is the origin of theory. Okay. A lot of people, when they say theory, mean political theory. Other people who say theory mean critical theory. Some people who say theory mean both. Other people who aren't even a part of this conversation, they just mean scientific theory. We're not talking about a scientific theory in a strict positive sense. Though all sciences start out as philosophy, they eventually, the ones that are most scientific, leave behind the words themselves for the most part. The words become less important, and the method kind of takes over. And Whereas in the humanities, a place that is a fraught war zone of propaganda, ideology, and sectarian dogmatism, there's a less, how shall we say, a falsifiability, which is a standard that most people into science today require. And so the question, is theory bullshit, is in a sort of sense, it's not just clickbait. It's a real question. If you look up the podcast Why Theory, and you should, because it's great, I could imagine myself pre-college or early in there just being like, I don't get it. It doesn't make sense to me. I don't see what's important about this. But for me, because I came in through political philosophy, I didn't even have any conception for what philosophy was. Because I came in just wanting to try to better understand politics and the ideas that have been out there about politics, I feel like I was a lot more into it from the beginning. But the real reason that political theory and critical theory get started with philosophy is because the real place that those two things start in the ways that people talk about them online is with Karl Marx. So anyway, it starts with Karl Marx because Marx was, in a sort of sense, a philosopher, but he was also studying economics, and he was getting into politics, and he was looking around and he thought everyone's ideas were really bad. And he had spent his younger days, his philosophical development being really into Hegel. And people, if they think of Hegel and if they have any kind of preconception of Hegel, it's probably wrong. If you read Emancipation After Hegel by the one of the hosts of Why Theory, Todd McGowan, then you will know that most people's conception of Hegel is false. Because people have this idea that Hegel just believed that history is a teleology to this utopia at the end, and that we'll get there through pure ideas. And that just by reading his system at the end of it, you'll become enlightened. And mainstream philosophers like Peter Singer have perpetuated this myth. It's not Hegel at all. Hegel wasn't an idealist on the other side from materialism. But nevertheless, Marx was greatly inspired by Hegel and wanted to really emphasize the material side of reality, because what he saw around him were people who really wanted to change the world and thought that we could basically do it with ideas and willpower. If we just keep talking and we use our will and we just talk about what we believe in and what we want, then we'll get it. So we go, I don't like, working 17-hour days in factories. Boo-hoo. I'm going to destroy technology. And then they'd go off and like smash machines, and Marx is like, They know the machine has something to do with their shitty situation, but their idea of what the situation really is, their context, their broader understanding, their theory, is wrong. It's not very theoretical. It's just kind of a gut thing. It's a reaction. And as a result, their praxis is misguided, because it's pretty easy to replace those machines. And even if you destroy the factory, there's a million more. And competitors are going to rise up, because this is not just an isolated incident, and it's not just you and your individual workers like there at the factory. It's actually a broader system thing. There are structural forces in play. There are market dynamics. There are political institutions. There are all these kinds of historical, material, and dialectical things that have developed the context to be what it is, so that individuals dealing with individual problems are missing the fact that those problems are really just symptoms of underlying causes. And science has always been about getting behind the mirror appearances, and not mirror appearances, mere appearances, like M-E-R-E. Now I'm confusing myself. But yeah, mirror appearances. Getting behind mirror appearances to get out what's really there. And so, and Marx is well aware that people have, strong opinions and feelings and bad ideas, and haven't put a lot of effort into trying to understand the world systematically, rigorously, in any kind of conceptual manner. But he wasn't just in the clouds. It wasn't just concepts. He wanted those concepts to be ones that come out of the actual situation beyond the mere appearances. And he wanted to do that in a rigorous and scientific manner because he wanted to scientifically change the world. And people are going to be like, oh my God, it's Scientology for politics. And in a sort of sense, depending on your Marxist, that can sometimes be true. It can be a little bit like Scientology, except that Scientologists did not allegedly kill hundreds of millions of people. Now, the reason I say allegedly is because I talked about a propaganda war and the fact that we live in the middle of it, and the fact that there was a Cold War between competing empires, where propaganda was everywhere and one side won and the other side kind of didn't win, resulted in now things are kind of skewed one way. But then when people realize that, a lot of the times they get critical of the mainstream thing and then they jump into the opposite thing. And that's also not very dialectical because it's obviously a lot more complicated than that, but we don't know reality just by taking the opposite side of the thing that you don't like. And, but taking the opposite side of the thing that you don't like, is or as opposed to the thing you don't like, the opposite opposed to. That is usually where it starts. But once you start to realize that what you're trying is not working out, or the things that people are saying don't really match reality, or that or it doesn't really make sense of your biggest concerns, or once you, this was me, back in my college days, if you are kind of saying, all right, I've spent a lot of time not thinking about these things in any kind of serious sense. And really to get into it would just take way too much. And I already know people who are way smarter than me who I would probably trust on this issue. You start going, no, I want to know more about that. At least for myself. And that was for me how it started. That was the very beginning, was going, oh, I'll take this philosophy class, and then, it starts with Plato, and I'm just like, oh, old dead white guy with a beard, and okay, whatever. I know, he's wearing a robe. Really? What, we're going to read from the Bible next? What's going on here, And not to denigrate that, but, I that was kind of just my mood, was like, okay, Plato, this will be mildly interesting. And then it was the Republic, which is the Republic is really the beginning of political philosophy, in the so-called West. It comes out of Greece, ancient Athens, around 2,400 years ago. And, Plato wrote all these dialogues, and he uses Socrates as his character. And, so he would write dialogues where the main character is Socrates, and Socrates had been killed. And that's why Plato had been really activated into philosophy, was seeing this man that he esteemed being put to death because he asked too many questions. And the authorities said, you make us look foolish in front of our little boys that we want to, so they were like, Socrates, you're going to have to leave. And he's like, I won't leave. You'll have to kill me if you want to silence me. But if you silence me, there'll be a million more of me. And then they were like, all right, we'll kill you. But then they put him in prison, and then they kept sending him opportunities to get out of prison, escape routes and stuff. And he's just like, no, you want to silence me, you're gonna have to kill me. And he drank the poison and died. Talked a lot before he died. And so Plato wrote about those talks. But the Republic, going back to that, is the beginning of political philosophy. And Aristotle's Politics is kind of where it gets formalized and argued with a lot. And those two books alone, you could study for a year, and it would be worth it. And they're amazing and definitely worthwhile. But when I first started reading the Republic, I remember thinking the professor who was telling me about this was really interesting and good at talking about it, but it wasn't enough to make me go, I'm going to try to read this really hard book. I was just talked to this guy about philosophy pretty recently. He's like, yeah, I was really interested in it. Love to hear people talk about it. Hate to read it though. He was like, I got some Nietzsche in class. I thought that was really cool, but no, I'm not going to like read stuff that difficult. And I was like, fair enough. Some people, I mean, one person's jouissance is the next person's stress, right? One person, the stressful kind of enjoyment that someone gets from something is the next person's stress. So, playing a really hard video game and like speed running it, that is just the feeling of sheer like enjoyment as opposed to like something relaxed, like that kind of would just stress the hell out of someone else. Theory is the same way. It is not going to be something that activates you. It'll just be stressful. Unless it becomes so, unless it somehow just becomes so. And so it may have already become so for you. Maybe it never will be. Maybe it'll always be stressful. That's how some people feel about math. That's how some people feel about writing. And a lot of people's feelings about intellectual things in general have been kind of ruined or tainted by a terrible education system. And that's really just too bad. Not that I know from firsthand experience, but I do know, people's reports on the ground say it's not good. Some people have really good experiences, really good schools, but that's the, exception. So, especially because you won't be encountering philosophy. And if you do, you'll probably do what I did and you'll get away with it. What did I do? Instead of reading it, I went online, read Sparks Notes, wrote my little answer for my quiz questions or whatever using Sparks Notes. And Sparks Notes, for those who don't know, is really just like, it's kind of how you would cheat. It's like, you don't have to read the thing yourself. It'll basically explain what happens there. And somehow this professor, when grading this paper, realized this is bullshit. And, back to the topic at hand, and was like, this is bullshit, and gave me an F. And me getting an F, I was like, I have been kicking butt in all my classes for this first semester of my college years. And so I am going to go talk to this guy, because how the hell did he give me an F? And he's like, listen, in the office, he's a really nice guy, like really nice, like kind of a gentle guy. But at the same time, he's just like, you can't come to philosophy and really get anything out of it unless you really try. And trying does not mean, say, reading this at the pool, for 20 minutes, sun tanning, it means struggling for hours. You set aside time and you put away your phone and you get rid of distractions and you force yourself to focus. And I was like, in my head, I was like, oh my God, yeah, right. That is already what's being demanded of me by my math classes. And so, but I did it. And long story short, and it's too late for that, but long story short, I did it. And what that did for me was it kind of went from being like this sort of stressful, like what the hell kind of thing, to being like this challenge I felt excited by, in the same way that I felt totally excited about video games before that. And so, not too far, this is like a couple years before I quit drinking, but I definitely at this point quit playing video games. So I was finding something that was better, that was richer, in the sense that, and this is the real reason that I came to this story, was to say that I found ideas and sort of like thinking through things from a variety of perspectives and contradictions and like trying to understand those. I realized that by following this stuff through, I was thinking myself out of circles, bad habits of thought, loops, circuits, scripts that I had been stuck in for years, maybe my whole life. I realized that growing up in a way that did not expose me to a lot of perspectives in a thoroughgoing way, that doesn't just say, oh, these people believe this and these people believe that and these people are bad and these people are good. And so you got to believe these things. And now that you're a good person, you believe these things. And here's the red flags for like the bad. And then there you go. Instead, thinking things through in that longer dialectical form that starts with Plato really unlocked things for me. And when I say like thinking in loops, it's almost like when you start reading philosophy, every time you finally understand something and light bulb goes off, you think, wow, I've kind of had this thought, but it was like the difference between a grain of sand and like the beach that I've just stepped out onto. My stupid little grain of sand was onto something. And here's a way of articulating the contradictions I was running into that I couldn't think beyond, that I didn't have the conceptual tools to supersede or overcome. And so, you know, I don't believe that everyone needs theory. I genuinely believe that there are people whose role here on earth is to not be theoretically based. But right now, what we live in is a society that is anti-philosophy in the extreme. And when there are people online or at conferences who are into theory, sometimes that means they're anti-philosophical too. They just think, oh, canon of dead white dudes. It's like, oh my fucking God. Canon of dead fucking white dudes? You fucking fool. Oh my God. There are so many problems with European civilization, but philosophy is the only way we fucking develop or understand anything. And I'm sorry the world's more complicated today than it used to be. And personally, I feel like I was stumbling around, banging into sharp objects and into walls and over cliffs in the dark, just feeling my way along, completely lost, no basis whatsoever, and no real way of avoiding all the problems I was running into, because all of everyone's ideas are horseshit. And so some people aren't guided by ideas or don't live their lives on the basis of ideas or their relation to their whatever. I'm saying there might be people who don't need it or whatever, but I'm just saying for people like me, holy shit, it makes a difference. So there is this whole question of like liberation, personal versus collective, that I have to think about. And philosophy that is political often considers the question of what personal liberation is, or at least what is the good life, meaning like what would be the proper ordering of society. Philosophy, though, in a broader sense, is about a personal liberation from the mind prison of bad ideas and all of the sort of cognitive biases that we have, holding mutually exclusive ideas, but never really thinking them through because you lack the conceptual tools to actually do it. That kind of thing. But there are many dangers once someone starts getting into philosophy and or theory. So let me just really quick peek in on the chat. I just want to see what's going on here. What's up, everybody, and welcome to the chat. So this person, Jay, says, just through my sociology classes is how this person got into theory and getting interested within theory, more specifically Marxism and postmodernism, though it has many faults. Yeah, all these things are flawed. Through high school and especially senior year. Oh, cool. Early on. Nice. Now in college. Oh, wow. Okay. Right into college, out of high school. But always being, just being politically interested in things, always been formally, publicly educated. Oh, I forgot to mention, one of the other reasons that people get into theory is through debate. So debate, sociology, literary criticism. Those are the three main ways that people get into theory in the United States. The other way would be online. But philosophy in the United States is generally, not to say all the time, detached from theory, because philosophy in the United States is predominantly the Anglo-Saxon analytic tradition, which has some really cool stuff, but also is kind of for a different kind of brain, to be neurotically reductive. It does seem like continental philosophy and what becomes critical theory through that is a thing that is for people who think about society a lot and try to understand like broader sort of civilizational, political, economic sociological, anthropological questions, as opposed to people who are generally focused on logic and science. So the split between sort of STEM and the humanities, STEM being science, technology, engineering, and math, the split where STEM gets prioritized over the humanities and social sciences in the United States, mostly because universities are funded by big business, and big business wants people who will be good professionals or managers, and good professionals or managers are going to be people who are literate in STEM. But in that schism between STEM and the humanities, even though obviously like you can do both things, there's the softer sciences and the stuff that gets taken less seriously by STEM people and by people who are just trying to make money or just make things work, and that's because there's generally a lack of method, and it's a lot more politicized in the humanities. But the thing is philosophy, which is supposed to be like the basis of both the humanities and the sciences, has in the United States, through the analytic tradition, basically become the handmaiden to the sciences, meaning that continental philosophy is just all the stuff that the analytic people didn't like. So, and like the analytic stuff starts with Frege and Bertrand Russell and Wittgenstein, who later becomes a little bit more continental in his later work, which is why analytics don't read it. Quine, Kripke, all these guys, they were mostly guys at the time. Now there's a lot of women, or not a lot. Actually, there's fewer women in philosophy in the United States than there is like in any other country, and that is because we prioritize this logic crunching stuff that doesn't like think about society. And I don't know. I guess women want to think about society, probably because they're studying feminism, and sadly, that's only in literary criticism or sociology, and philosophy is like not very good at that usually, at least not in the United States. Is what I'm trying to say. And so anyway, I didn't just immediately come upon theory, and it was philosophy at first. And there are, like I said, theory people who don't like philosophy, who somehow see it as just like this old canon. They don't understand that you can't do critical theory, and you can't understand theory, in the last couple hundred years without like a basis in the history of ideas. I'm pretty sure. I don't really think that you can. I mean, they can use theorists all they like to write, interesting opinion pieces, with a lot of references that get published in academic journals that supposedly do theory. But if they actually really want to get on the shoulders of those giants that they're referencing, the ones that really like kick off the fields that they're interested in theory, they have to understand that those people are working deeply within the context of the supposed canon. And so like there's this whole argument about like how the canon should be expanded and modified, but people who just want to throw it out, I disagree. And I disagree as a person who would have in the past just blown me off in my current present, would have just blown me off. Whatever, who cares? I don't care. And that's fine. If you don't care, there's a million other videos to go watch. Billions, actually. Go watch billions of videos. Or go watch Billions, the show. But either way, go watch something else. But if you're getting into theory, or if you're wondering if you should get into theory, that's what this episode's about. I don't want to go on all night about it. I do want to get back to the chat, and I want to touch on a couple of more things from my notes. Like I said, I'm going to talk about if I was getting into theory now, where would I start? What are some resources for doing that? What are some tips? We'll talk a lot more about the rest of those things in future episodes. My coffee got cold because I was talking too much. So I'm going to pour myself another cup, read off the chat, and we'll get to a couple more things before we close out here. And make sure that if you are catching up with this and you have any questions along the way, put them in the chat, and I'll get back to reading the rest of this. Apologies, will this live stream be uploaded later? Yeah. It will be here on the channel, but it will also be in its edited form on every podcast app. If you just look for Theory Plebe, I have a show, People in Our Lives, under Theory Plebe. I didn't purposely put it under Theory Plebe, but because my account name was that, it turns out to actually show up as under Theory Plebe, and so that might come up for you. But I also have Theory Plebe, my actual podcast. Currently, it has a whole like book discussion on gender trouble, which I was reading for the first time, or kind of the second time, and there's so much stuff on the podcast that I don't like. And I just, for the people who have been subscribed or have listened to the podcast, and, you know, some of those episodes have thousands of listens, you know, I just have to say, I'm so sorry for never caring about this podcast until now. This is episode 1. This is where it begins. This is where we really get the conversation going. And I was confused. I didn't really prioritize or care about my podcast platform. I cared more about videos. In the last year, I've cared more about my book, which is actually shown on screen and says coming soon. So make sure to go through theoryplebe.com and subscribe to my updates so that you can know all about that when that comes out. But, you know, I've never focused on the podcast. I'm saying that's about to change because, well, like I said, I want something practical. Yes, it's about theory, but nevertheless, it's practical in the sense that this is literally something that I will give people who ask me about theory, which happens all the time. And one of my favorite things that I've done on this channel, on this YouTube channel, Theory Plebe, is I just did a stream. What is philosophy? And I think someone was supposed to come for a discussion. Because they didn't arrive for the discussion for the interview, I ended up doing the stream on what is philosophy, and I literally did it off of the cuff in the same way that I'm doing this one. And afterwards I was like, that was a lot of fun. Dang, I should do that more. And I've tried all kinds of things with my video content, and I've experimented with various formats. Some are very time consuming. Honestly, my opinion about video essays is that they're basically a way to sink millions of hours to say like surprisingly little. You can't say very much. They're very good for some kinds of introductory things or some kinds of ideas that get presented. But generally speaking, I have like 50 things that I want to say in an essay format. Like I can't fit them into an essay format. Like they come through better in other mediums, like this one. And so, yeah, what I'm trying to say about my channel. Yes, in answer to Priceless Air. Air is priceless. But for Priceless Air, who asked if this live stream will be uploaded later, it will be available on my YouTube channel, but more importantly, it will be on the podcast. And the podcast will begin to be curated to actually follow sort of a genesis, where I don't intend to make it so that you have to listen to every episode in chronological order, because I don't really believe in chronology or linearity. But there will be like a series coming, and this series will take you from where I was when I was just getting into philosophy, what I was already describing, to where I am now. And I'm not saying that I'm an expert. I have a master's degree. Other people have PhDs. Some people don't have any degrees. Some people I know without degrees know a whole lot more than people with PhDs. Some people with PhDs are geniuses, but they're rare. They're the exception. Most PhDs, it's like, cool, you're a geek who knew how to like earn a good grade and you just kept going with it. And that's not to denigrate, but it's also like, get off your high horse. You're not better than people who do essential labor. You fucking snob. And so, you know, sympathetic. But I think at this point, it's like Damon Garcia was saying, like, when you're still studying like a lot and you have a lot of questions and you're constantly thinking about like how little you actually know about this stuff that you're so fascinated by, you forget you do know a lot more than you realize. And so sometimes it helps to just get started talking. And when you don't know who to talk to, or you don't really know the demographic you're speaking to because you don't know them in real life, and it's just online people who are probably really cool, but ultimately they're avatars. It can help to do this, I think, this way, where you're, really developing the content specifically for people you're studying with or that you will be studying with. So let's just say that I'm going to read some Levinas, and someone's like, what's Levinas? Why do you care about Levinas? Sounds like a hand lotion. What's with Levinas? And I'm like, it's this theorist. Oh, a theorist. What? For what kind of theory? Oh, like theory, like philosophy and theory. Oh, okay. And then, okay, the person gets me talking about Levinas, and I explain, contextualize, who he was in respect to Heidegger, and how philosophy had kind of come upon these rocks, this breaking point. And then there was the Second World War and Nazism. And so this is like a critical response to all of that, at the same time as trying to debunk some of the most deeply held preconceived notions and frameworks and habits of thought that we have. And that the language and style of this is terrifyingly difficult, but also just beautiful. And the guy's practically a poet at the same time that he is this sort of religious person who's not using religion in the entire book, but is just using the tools of philosophy, deconstructing some of the most popular modes of philosophy or schools of philosophy or fields, of his time. But not just philosophy, also just like scientific knowledge and the limits of it, taking to task like everything, like the most radical critique. And it's forever, changed the way that people think and talk. And there's ways that this has trickled down into the mainstream that you're not even aware of, that once you kind of get into it, you're going to know. And I keep going on and on and on. And then a person goes, okay, Levinas. Okay, I'll check it out. Tries to read it, comes back to me. What the fuck? This is crazy. How are we going to do this? Like, oh, you want to talk about it? This happens. I do this. For instance, one of my friends over the summer, after a couple of people, and I talked about a chapter of my book in this reading group that I've read it. And there's a Q&A, right? And like, because I talked about Levinas in that chapter, there were some really good questions about Levinas. And so I started talking about Levinas. If you get me talking about Marx, Heidegger, Levinas, Lacan, Hegel, I'm gonna get lit up, and it'll be hard to shut me up. Usually I do shut up though. It sucks. Like, at least on a stream, you kind of just like, hey, I can talk. This is my spot. In a discussion group is kind of weird. You don't want to hog too much space. And so I try not to, like in real life, but talked for like 5 minutes though about Levinas. Like, what is totality and infinity? What does totality mean? What does infinity mean? What is Levinas's project? What is that all about? Talked about it. One of my dear friends says on the way out after the meeting, says, I ordered that today. It'll be coming to my house soon. I have the summer off. I'm going to read it. Kind of like in the, you want to do it with me? Kind of. I was like, because we've read a bunch of books together, hard ones. Like, this guy had never studied philosophy, and then he started reading Being in Time with Me. Should give you an idea of like how this guy went from zero to the deep end and was just lost for like a year and a half, and has come out the other side ahead of most people who study philosophy for like years and years and years. And because that's, it accelerates to get deeply interested in something but profoundly confused, and to embrace that confusion and just to keep digging deeper. It'll really accelerate the process, as opposed to I'm going to start with an introductory book and then build up from there. And so one of the names of the podcast that I thought I played with was reading on hard mode or something like that. Anyway, so this friend goes, you want to read it? I'm instantly like, okay, I was doing this whole series on Hegel, or at least Adorno's, Introduction to Dialectics sort of series on my YouTube channel. But now I'm going to stop doing that and focus on totality and infinity because I love this book. And the idea that someone who I have been in ongoing dialogue with now for years, that's exciting. And so seize the opportunity. But in the future, when these things happen, I'm going to be like, especially for people who are reaching out to me saying, hey, what should I want to do philosophy. I want to get into something. I need to get my hands up. Where do I start? Well, this is where, okay. I already did a whole stream on philosophy. This is theory. They're not the same thing. Philosophy gets called a variety of things. Most philosophers have like their own kind of like different idea of what philosophy is. For Deleuze and Guattari, it's like the invention of concepts. And it's not the kind of concepts that science is able to invent. And so it's a really important, task for philosophy. But a lot of people think of it as the love of wisdom and, or the history of ideas, or, they think of it as like, okay, they kind of think like there's just worldviews, and worldviews start with like charismatic, brilliant figures. And people become really big fans of those worldviews, and that's philosophy. And it's like, people think, it's like a critical, ongoing dialogue that uses logic, ethics, metaphysics, ontology, aesthetics. That's philosophy. And really, to say like philosophers used to be, before like the analytic moment in America, philosophers were usually polymaths, meaning they were studying art, math, science, philosophy, all at the same time. But then they would write books of like pure philosophy, meaning like general concepts that would apply to all domains of human life, where questions of like ultimate truth and justice like are going to be centered and tracked. Okay. Theory breaks off from that with Karl Marx, bringing it all back around, like I said I would. Why does it break off? He wants to turn Hegel on his head and stop thinking about the world and start changing the world. Theory is theory that tries to change the world. It tries to understand the world so as to change the world. Okay. But when I say that it's kind of the origin of both critical theory and of political theory, Marx is both. But then after him, there is a split. And that split is basically between like Rosa Luxemburg, Lenin, Trotsky, Stalin, Mao, and related Marxists, traditional Marxists, orthodox Marxists, what have you. That's the political theory tradition. And then there's the critical social democrat, anarchist, and syndicalist, whatever other kinds of theory, political theory that are, critically responding to Bolshevism, which was a mode of organizing, and party/practice that developed in Soviet Russia. That's political theory. For the most part, when people are talking theory, but what they mean is Lenin, they're into politics. It's political theory. That kind of theory, it reads like manifestos. It reads like really exciting speeches. It's ultimately meant to move people, and it's meant to do so strategically. So you have to take what they're saying with a sort of grain of salt, because you don't understand the historical context, and you don't always know like what like their ultimate objectives are, because in politics it's kind of weird. It gets a little fucky, but it's still fascinating. It's important. I am more on the side of critical theory, and I'm getting more into political theory because I'm trying to understand like why we're like, whenever people really get into theory, like they're like political theory, like they're still working with stuff from like over 100 years ago, and like reapplying the same concepts when like the point was for Marx to get outside of concepts that basically stay the same and lose touch with the reality they're trying to understand and change. And like it doesn't it's supposed to evolve. It's supposed to track the actual like material changes. Critical theory starts with Marx in the Critique of Political Economy. You arguably could say it starts with Immanuel Kant, and that Marx is where the critical method gets focused on political economy and changing the world. Though, of course, I think, Kant was a political writer as well. And so, but for Marx, it was like we're going to understand political economy better than the political economists do, because we're going to understand everything that they've done. And then we're going to take to task all of the presuppositional frameworks and assumptions that they rely on, and show the broader context that is being eclipsed by this fetishization of supply and demand, and like the kind of the sort of dogmatic or like near religious sort of explanations for why we do things or why we should do things differently. And instead, we're going to have something that gets outside of like moralizing and hand wringing and virtue signaling, and get something that is tracking reality and able to change it in a methodological scientific sense. Critical theory in this sense, saying it's, for Marx, really at the point of Critique of Political Economy, becomes something that is later turned against both communism and capitalism in their own ways. Because Soviet Russia becomes a sort of dystopic bureaucracy, which there's lots of reasons for that. We don't have to get into it right now. It's always complicated, but because it does become that, and because it is trying to replace religion with this state ideology that is supposedly science, that has supposedly figured everything out. And there is a new class of bureaucrats who are, so-called professional revolutionaries. Some of them heart in the right place and earnestly fighting the good fight. Others, opportunist pieces of shit. Because Marxism sort of gets hijacked by these people who cherry pick it and just use it the way that some priests will, just to coerce people and exploit people ultimately. Critical theory, really kind of with the Frankfurt School, turns against just the ideology of, we've got the one, historical explanation that will like get us out of this, all the problems in the world, and it's all right here and we've got to figure it out. Versus, the capitalism's clearly better. America's great. They're like, no. None of y'all are scientific enough. All of y'all have accepted way too many things without really thinking about it. We're going to go deeper. And because what people currently believe and what people are talking about and reading, it's like does not explain real shit that we have to deal with today. And they keep kind of making the same mistakes because their praxis is based in bad theory. So critical theory comes along, and I'm not the biggest, Frankfurt Schoolian. I'm not huge into Adorno and Horkheimer and Marcuse and Habermas and what's the one with the P? Pollock. I really want to read all of them eventually. And Swolitariat's been pushing this one that's less well known named Grossman, I believe. I need to read him. But anyway, critical theory, though, is also used in a broader sense than the Frankfurt School to include what gets called postmodernism. Because there's a sort of weird thing where people say theory and mean critical theory, and really what they mean is continental philosophy. And continental philosophy is already just what I told you. It's the stuff that deals with politics and society, sociology, anthropology, and linguistics, and psychology, all of these things that analytical philosophy usually doesn't deal with. And it tries to do so in, if not a holistic manner, then at least a sort of way that develops a sort of mode or a way of seeing things that can be useful across all of these different fields. So, which is great because we live in all these fields all the time. And we have thoughts about these fields all the time because everyone's a natural philosopher in a certain sense. Everyone's a natural theorist in a certain sense. I mean, we all are doing praxis in a certain sense in our various ways. And we ought to be living experiments trying to make the world better. Or, that's an argument. And that's an argument that critical theory presupposes. Point being, theory wants to change the world, but there's a split between political theory and critical theory. Critical theory turns its critical gaze against both sides of the Cold War. And every theorist does it in a different way. And at the end of the day, what philosophy and theory share, there's great overlap, can basically be, at least for me, I'll just say it this way. They're both tools in the toolkit for deprogramming people from ideology, for deprogramming people from cults, from people wanting to take personal ownership over their lives and understand why they do things, for people who want to understand why they don't understand, but whatever. There's endless possibilities here once you start getting into it. As I said, I'm mostly coming from, it's like Marx, Heidegger, Levinas, and recently I've been reading a lot of Foucault. These are like the sort of intellectual powerhouses that informed the development of what is mainstream theory today. I don't like mainstream theory today. I don't like academia today. I've been to a lot of conferences. There are very nice people there, but there's also a lot of bullshit. And so the question, is theory bullshit? Well, we have to really define our terms here. I feel like I've talked a lot about theory. We haven't talked a lot about bullshit yet. Bullshit, as what Harry Frankfurt says, I think that's his name. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure someone named Frankfurt, as the last name, wrote this book called On Bullshit, where it's developed as a technical term. I mean, and he does a really cool job. He does this etymology of the word bull, like associated with the word bull session, as well as a few other things, which basically means a way of talking that is not in reference to truth. When you lie, you are lying in reference to truth. You know what the truth is, but you're lying. Now, you could kind of deceive, you could be deceptive and not kind of tracking, but to lie, you are tracking truth. The liar respects truth in a way that the bullshitter does not, because the bullshitter is not thinking about truth or lies, they're just talking. And if theory is something developed by professional managerial elites who think themselves above essential labor, who consider themselves professional revolutionaries because they basically read old books, and they think that it's their God-given role in life to do this from some ivory tower while everyone else continues working and organizing, and that ultimately they're writing ideas that will trickle down or get used by the masses. They're ultimately here to manage the masses. That's what a professional manager does in their own ways. The shepherds of souls for secular age. Then it's not very critical. Theory can become very dogmatic and anti-intellectual, and just kind of like take the side of some theorist that someone gets a lot out of, and then not really read anything else, and then just kind of run with that theory or that theorist and just kind of presuppose it. Oh, this is it. I figured it out. Now, look, I have people in my life, Michael says, Lacan, I'm a Lacanian. I'm a Hegelian Lacanian. I know I am Baudrillardian 100%. And I'm like, that's cool. what I am annoyed by is when I go to all these conferences and there's people who just read Derrida and talk shit about all the rest of the life of the mind, the fields of knowledge that have been developed, that are complex and complicated, and like there are crises and rifts and contradictions and factions and all of this stuff is worth like knowing and seeing in its development, but they just kind of write it all off, and they've hung their hat on Derrida, or they've hung their hat on Marx, or they've hung their hat on Hannah Arendt or Judith Butler or Homi Bhabha, or whatever. They found their theorist. They're basically specializing in that theorist the way some people can specialize in a language. Like, I studied Italian, I studied Foucault. And it's like, I'm sorry, but they're all kind of in conversation with one another. I just don't understand what this compartmentalization is about, when the whole field of critical theory and philosophy, all of these theories have been for the most part, not these decontextualized, hyper specialized things, but have been instead like people who are trying to understand the world and use and acquire the concepts for personal and, if not, collective liberation. But instead, you go to conferences and people are just like, I'm going to do a Derridian deconstruction of this movie. And then they basically, like, their thesis is something that you would see in a BuzzFeed article or in like Jezebel. It's just like really not like, it's like, oh my gosh, it's not good. And then it's just like, they're just padding it out with big words. They're just padding it out with jargon. And they're ultimately doing it to get published in a journal or to go to a conference, just because they're on a career path that has been set out by the fact that they are a geek who gets good grades. I love geeks, but I'm saying that being a geek who gets good grades, who's into Foucault, though valid, does not, I don't think, usually really inspire people. And I don't think that you can like do philosophy in sort of like this isolated manner that just kind of, I've found the person I'm going to study for the rest of my life. So what I want to encourage people to do when they ask where to start is to window shop for a while, and then do that in various levels that will get deeper or not. You can go as deep as you want, really. Whenever you have an interest in something, but you feel you need to go and finish something that you'd started when you're interested in something else, sometimes that's true and you do need to. And having a sort of sense of consistency and being reliable and all of that is ultimately sometimes valid. But most of y'all have been programmed with this idea that you need to finish a book before you can move on to another book. Stuff like that. That's not true. I mean, go for it, but you're not going to be reading a lot, if you're like that, because when you're interested in something, you check it out. Do you have to finish a show just because you started it? Do you have to finish a website just because you started it? Do you literally read every page of a website? No. And so, this podcast will have a lot more stuff on tips, but for now, I'm just saying that the part of theory that feels a lot like bullshit is when people use it for an ideology they've just presupposed to be true, and it's not being used to critically understand the world. It's being used to cherry pick quotes and drive an agenda that existed before the person even started studying. Now, I would be remiss to, and I'll still get to comments, by the way, but I would be remiss to not talk about an important distinction brought up by Emmanuel Levinas in this book, Totality and Infinity, which, by the way, it just happened to be ready to hand when I was like setting up the stream, because I'm not at my house, and it was the only book I had on me because I'm in a group reading it right now. So it's like, I don't want to keep plugging this book as though it's like the book. It is a great book. But one of the things that I liked Levinas, I like that he brought this up. He talks about the difference between critique and theory. So though there are people who lump critique and theory together in the conjunction critical theory, there is in Levinas this distinction that I find really useful. And so it's actually one I now use. And so that's why I said I would be remiss to not touch on this before closing out this episode. Because critique, I think I found it. No, I'm sitting here paging through it for the folks on podcast version. I'm trying to find the quote. But anyway, it's in the first chapter of Totality and Infinity, and he says that critique is being called into question by the other, as opposed to theory, which tries to grasp, take hold of, and understand / manipulate the other. Theory as a tool of ideology instead of as a tool for deprogramming or gaining distance from ideology becomes a way of manipulating others. Theory as a systematic comprehension of the world that tries to grasp the objects of knowledge so as to understand, so as to manipulate, is a tool of empire, of colonialism, of the state, of any form of power that wants to render the entire world intelligible in terms of use values and exchange values, so as to compartmentalize, decontextualize, strip down, and render maximally fungible as possible every object and subject on the planet, to reduce every subject on the planet to a mere object, not to even a mere object, but one that is on standby, one that is on call, to a global economy that wants to, like I said, decontextualize and strip down, reduce, dehumanize, and ultimately exploit. Okay. Theory, understood as a way of reducing all things to one thing, whether it's money, whether it's like knowledge for who, to what end. Theory in this sense is radically opposed to being called into question by the other, because it is literally trying to totalize and control the other. Whether the other in this sense is nature, whether the other in this sense is others in the world, the concrete, actually existing face-to-face other that is like right over there. Theory, and think about that. We literally do that, where you think about entire countries like they're a person. We totalize them, strip them down, think that we've got them figured out, can classify them, write them off as, irrelevant or a shithole or stupid, enemy, or friend. We reduce people down out of their complexity. We reduce the world down out of its complexity into a system that is trying to do something with all that. Theory does this. And that, at least for Levinas, that's what that means. This is a way I think about theory. It's always worth being called into question and having theory called into question, and considering when philosophy gets used this way. It's always a worthwhile endeavor, in my opinion. And so critique, though, being called into question by the other, what does that mean? So like if someone in the chat right now, Curses and Prayers is done with psych homework. Awesome. Welcome. So critique is like, it's not just like talking shit. It's not just like, you're stupid. Critique is not just like, your fashion sense is wrong. Critique is critique in the way that Levinas is using it here means that you have to wonder, am I wrong? And step back from the things you hold dear and give yourself over to the possibility that there are other things that you don't know, that might even scare you. You might actually kind of know them and you don't even want to face up to them. Critique, being called into question by the other, is not just being this performative influencer. Oh, you're all my little family. I tell you everything. And then being like open to being called into question by the, the community. No, we're talking, I mean, in Levinas's sense, it is a concrete face-to-face thing. It is the other people who make an immediate demand on you, who from your childhood onwards. And by the way, someone who heard I was doing the stream said I should have started off with some child psychology that's relatable. Well, more like I'm going to close out with it. But from an early age, we are called into question by others, and we have to give a defense for ourselves. And we have to explain, or we have to learn how to, and this is theory, ultimately understand so as to control or manipulate others. No, I'm not so cynical as to say that that's all human relationships. I don't believe that. But critique it comes first. Before theory is critique. Before the development of discourses and the refinement of various fields of knowledge. Before that gets underway, there was the child who was called into question, and philosophizing and science spring forth from that in every society. And in the tradition that we're talking about right now, it has really spiraled out in a lot of directions, and most people don't even know where to get started. More important than where to start, it's more like what channels to follow, and maybe like a couple of books to take a look at, but more important than what to read or what videos to watch or who to follow. More important than any of that, which is the main thing that people are asking about, is method. And when it comes to method, there's not a lot of podcasts. So that is something I will be emphasizing more than anyone else. That's a big statement, but it might be true. Method, meaning I don't just pick and choose thinkers. Method, meaning I don't just go with what's convenient. Method, meaning I constantly will take to task those awfully convenient assumptions. And so when doing theory, when expanding our understanding of the world, simultaneously tripping up and stopping all the time, forcing breakdowns. And a good way to do that isn't just concrete others in your life, but it is taking different concepts, ideas, and thinkers and running them up against each other. It's great. If you are working and you don't have like the kind of job that forces you to constantly give attention to someone else or other people, then you can actually reflect on these things. And that's actually not so true of people in professional or managerial positions. Prisons. Nice slip. It's not so with the professional managerial class, which, by the way, when you do have defectors from the professional managerial class who themselves want to be professional revolutionaries, usually it's to make up for their privilege or whatever. They don't have the time to understand theory, to really dig into these things. Yet at the same time, they're writing like the prescriptions for people's actions and trying to tell people how to live. So what are they presuming? What are they presupposing? What assumptions are packed into everything that they're doing? Are we just recycling and reusing old concepts and ideas in a sort of uncritical and dogmatic way, where for every theorist, with all of these operating assumptions assumed explicitly or just through the back door implicitly, for every one of these theorists, there are assumptions that some are methodologically, like they're explicitly talked about, other ones not so much. They kind of get smuggled in, like I said. Theory becomes ideology when those operating assumptions that a theorist is using as they try to develop a systematic or comprehensive understanding of the world get turned into tenets, principles, truths that are to be held self-evident. So where, for instance, critical race theory becomes just pure ideology is when the operating assumptions that are proving useful to theorists who are thinking about things become commandments and truths to be held as beyond critical suspension, beyond one's ability to say, I don't know, being repeated and forced upon people dogmatically. There's obviously a lot of hype and stupidity, madness really, around CRT today. But critical race theory also has people who are kind of how I described, the people who are, they're just running with this job that they have, and they're using the words, but they're just repeating bullshit. It's not in reference to truth. They don't even care. And while theory can often be critical and call into question things like, logic, the fundamental rules of logic, and call into question when those are applicable and when they're not. It can, at the same time, just become a dogmatic tool of suppression and personal ego empowerment for a careerist. And I personally I think that we should always be critical of everything, and especially online, especially when it comes to professionals and managers. And I'm not a populist in the sense that I just think, oh, the professional managerial class is bad, the people are good and they know what's best. No, I'm profoundly just upset about the fact that everyone seems so uninterested in really actually having like long, thoroughgoing dialogue about what's up and how to change it outside of these things that are presupposed for like 100, 150 years. Like, yeah. So while the history of ideas is important, and while theory is important, so is critique. And that's of one's most closely held presuppositional frameworks and assumptions. And so that's basically it. That's basically my answer to the question, is theory bullshit? Sometimes. And at the same time, a very important tool in the toolkit for deprogramming or problematizing or calling into question ideology. And definitely that is for personal liberation, and very strongly potentially for broader kinds of liberation. But when it comes to ruts that we are stuck in, when it comes to scripts and loops, theory is a way to break out of that. So the closing plug I wanted to make right after I read this comment is for a few channels that I don't think I've ever plugged from my channel before that have kind of arisen. A couple of these, I stopped making essays, and then I all of a sudden found these other channels that were doing essays way better than anything I'd ever done. And so I'm definitely going to make big plugs for them. But really quick, I just wanted to double check here. So Elijah Snow Rackley in the chat. It's good to see you. It has been a long time, hasn't it? It's been a while. Sorry, pouring another cup of coffee because once again, that last one went cold because I get talking and then I forget to drink it and then it gets cold. And cold would be fine, but it gets lukewarm. Anyway, Jay Grimes says, Is it bad I don't find Hegel as difficult as it should be? For me, it is a matter of making sure I know what the terminology means. I like you, but also hate you, because there's just always that feeling of like when something comes really easily to somebody, it's always like, oh, dang it. That must be what it's like to be smart. I'm not smart. I'm just dedicated. So I just like read it a lot, and then eventually it starts to make sense. But the plugs I'm going to do here. Epoch Philosophy is a really good channel. Really good video essays. Fantastic. One Dime. Honestly, One Dime and Epoch Philosophy are like fucking... I don't watch a lot of theory stuff on YouTube. I really don't. And I have only seen a little bit of either of these channels, but everything I have seen, I'm just like, oh my God. Usually I will rewatch one of their videos rather than going on to another one that they've done, because I mean, their videos aren't going anywhere, hopefully. And so I'm just been slowly working through them. Dank Audio Stash. Oh my gosh. If I'd known about Dank Audio Stash, oh my gosh, a long time ago. Just window shopping. Just window shopping. Some of this stuff won't be your thing. Just window shop. It's okay. You can't know what to buy until you've window shopped. And the nice thing about philosophy, theory, books, ideas, videos, you don't have to really buy them necessarily. First of all, there's ways to pirate books. You can just go to Library Genesis, but not saying that you should. More importantly though, the fact that you're not buying in the sense of like buying into an ideology that you have to commit to and now like adhere to. Like theorists and philosophers are usually a lot bigger than some politicians' ends. Usually they're like just getting to see the world a little bit the way that they're seeing the world. It's going to help you see the world. And then whatever intellectual or creative endeavors you take on in your future will be enriched. And that's a promise. It will be. You will get 3 times more out of it than it takes out of you, and it will change your life. That's a promise. So if you like your life the way it is right now, and you don't want to disrupt anything, and you don't really want to change, then don't bother. But if you want to take on something challenging that will help you connect a lot of dots and become more self and world aware in ways that you didn't know was imaginable, then welcome and get excited. Dank Audio Stash, One Dime, and Epoch Philosophy are really probably 3 of the best ways to start. I also want to just throw in theory and philosophy, and with an ampersand. Theory and Philosophy, great channel. Once again, haven't watched a lot of those videos, but everything I have seen, love it. Love it. E-Codex. Oh gosh, I really hope I'm using the right name for her channel. Let's make sure, because I know I did the right name for those other channels. Let's make sure. Okay. Let's go to me. I'm going to pull it up here. I do believe it's E-Codex. Let's see. Down here, if you scroll down to my YouTube page, go to the bottom, you'll find some of these channels. Oh yeah, the Normie Times doesn't do stuff anymore, but it has some really good stuff. CCK Philosophy, also Jonas, I believe it's Cheka, used to be Cuck Philosophy, great channel. Also kind of came along before, Cuck Philosophy was like the OG, one of the best. E-Codex. Oh, and Todd McGowan is on here. Oh my gosh. Yeah, Todd McGowan. Justin Murphy brings on all kinds of people for interviews, theorists, talk about books. But Todd McGowan is probably the best philosophy professor in the world, for Hegel at least. I mean, when I'm talking about, in a sort of introductory sense. I want to really make sure really quick. Is this coming up on the screen here? Yeah, y'all can see that, right? Yes! Good. So, E-Codex. what I like, I don't know this person's first name. I don't know. I've only seen a few of this person's streams, but I love a lot of these books that she's reading on here. Hold on, let's go to the about section and make sure that I'm using the right pronouns here. Cybernetician Doomer GXF, like girlfriend /XF. Cool. Yeah. So anyway, reads theory books, live streams, chill sessions, sipping wine, great time, good stuff. Must sub. The links will be in the description after this video is up. Like tomorrow, I'll go back and add that stuff later. Yeah, theory and philosophy, kind of started reading long sections of books and then kind of talking about them just over a blank screen, and then eventually started showing his face, and then like just doing kind of more like early Philosophy Tube style videos, and really good stuff. And you know, Philosophy Tube could be a way of getting into philosophy as well. When I was getting into philosophy, I definitely checked out the early Philosophy Tube videos. I keep emphasizing early the Philosophy Tube because Ollie, now Abigail, was sitting in front of a bookshelf and just talking about theory while working on a degree. And those videos are really great. It's awesome to listen to people with accents because it makes it more enjoyable. I think a lot of the times we learn better from people with British accents, I think. But speaking of accents, the last in the list, and this is very important for beginners. I don't know that I would take everything all of these people say with a grain of salt. Please take everything all of these people say with a grain of salt. People almost never know what they're talking about. So, you know, but nevertheless, you've got to start somewhere. But what did I want to do here? Rick Roderick. If you just type in Rick Roderick playlist on YouTube, you'll find this playlist for Rick Roderick Lectures on Philosophy. Rick Roderick Self Under Siege, 20th Century Philosophy. There's all these playlists. Nietzsche and the Postmodern Condition, a whole series. Philosophy and Human Values, a whole series. Download these while they're available. I highly recommend storing these away, keeping these on hand in case these get taken down eventually. I love Rick Roderick. He is the voice in the beginning of those Zero Books, or Zero Books has like a podcast, and in the intro there's this southern drawl saying, "The death of God is a drying up of a horizon of meaning," blah blah blah, and it's this guy. I'll show a clip here. I'll just skip it.
Like that. What I'd like to try today is to do something a little different, and that's to place philosophy in a historical context and then go through that and follow the mutation of problems centered on what it means to be human. A question that for me will begin with, Now,
I don't have my headphones on and I couldn't hear that, and so I don't know what was going on just now, but I hope you get the idea. He's very enjoyable to listen to, a very great professor, very interesting. And I think that is the stuff that I would make sure to subscribe to on YouTube. There's more. I can add more later, but those are the ones that I really want to say I would start there. Obviously, this podcast, the Theory Plebe podcast, I'll go in depth on a variety of thinkers. I've already done a whole 2.5 hour stream on Nietzsche and why he's good for the people he criticizes, including Christians and socialists. I'm going to do the same thing for a variety of thinkers, especially the big names that I keep mentioning, like Heidegger and Marx and, Foucault and Levinas and people like that. So I'm also going to do a few special ones, 5 women in philosophy that you absolutely must read. I'm going to do some just episodes like that. And they will be on every podcast app. Hopefully, they should be. And they'll also be here on my channel. So you can check them out on YouTube. You won't always get to see me when I'm talking. Sometimes it'll just be the blank screen. So there will be a variety of ways to get this, to listen to this when you're at work or driving to work or going on walks or washing dishes or whatever it is that you're doing, driving trucks long haul. There's a lot of ways that this could become useful. And just so you know, like, oh, well, people driving long haul, they can't be reading philosophy theory plebe. Well, fair enough. But actually, I chainsaw all day listening to audiobooks now. And so that's been my main thing. And I'm just loving it that I'm getting paid to listen to multi-volume works of philosophy and theory and history. And I've developed more in the last 3 months than I have in the last 6 years. And I'm just getting started. And so I'm really excited just to tell you that your listening comprehension can grow and that you can take on more than you think, and that what seems stressful can actually just be fun. And while you don't have to, there's no one saying you have to. There's no one holding a gun to your head and saying you have to. If you've listened this long, if you're actually enjoying this, then you should be excited for what's coming, because I am, and I can't wait. Deleuze and guitars. Good to see you in the chat. I listen to Rick Roderick at work and my coworkers think I'm listening to a televangelist. Yeah, exactly. He is kind of like a televangelist. Too bad he's not alive anymore. Some professors are really good at teaching. Some professors are really good at thinking. Some are really good at both. Sometimes that thinking involves research. Sometimes that thinking involves original like contributions to the field. There's a variety of ways that this can happen. Rick Roderick is one of those people. I don't know. I haven't read his books or anything like that, so I can't really evaluate him as a thinker. All I can say is he's a good teacher. And if you don't really have like any ideas to like, if you don't have a face to go with the name, but you've heard the name before, like Nietzsche or Kant, you don't really have like ideas to go with the name. You just kind of have heard the name. Then that's a good place to start. Also, Wes Cecil is also really good. Wes Cecil. It's just like some random YouTube channel. Some professor in Oregon uploads lectures and does ones that are basically like biography pieces and sketches of thinkers. So between Rick Roderick and Wes Cecil, you can get like a functioning kind of sense of what these different people are about. Of course, I really have to emphasize, not in any way that I think is like enough. And so at the end of the day, you just want to do a lot of different things. As far as podcasts go, I already plugged Y Theory, and I think Todd McGowan is both an amazing teacher and thinker. And Y Theory is his podcast. But I also really like, and when I was first getting into philosophy, I really like Partially Examined Life. These guys, 4 guys, they all got masters, decided to not go further with philosophy, but they still kind of want to do it as a hobby, have conversations about books that they sometimes seem to, some of them understand somewhat, and then other times not. And just listening through it all is ultimately good if you really like hearing people in long form dialogue talking about things and having a good time. They're relatable, nice, cool, good, all of that. So I believe Philosophize This is another good one. I think there's Philosophy Bits. If you type in philosophy on any podcast app, you'll probably find a million things. A lot of people use the word philosophy when what they mean is worldview or ideology. And so you got to look out, because that shit's boring or not very deep, doesn't go very far. It's not really useful. It's not really interesting or enlightening, and so whatever, but the ones that I've listed so far are fucking awesome. I cannot emphasize that enough. Mecca, how you doing? Tuned in late, but we'll go back and listen. Fantastic. I'm sorry that, so if you're late and you've gone back, by the time you catch up, you will most likely, this stream will be over. And, this will be available later, both here on the channel and on all the podcast apps. Now I'm repeating myself. Now I really have to close out if I'm repeating myself. So anything else that I need to touch on before I go? Theory, it's a thing for the intellectual vanguard or for the professional revolutionaries, which is problematic. And theory gets opposed to ideology, which is for the rank and file, for the individual consumers, for people who are being programmed. And so while the two can be working in some sort of a critical and symbiotic relationship, that is the extreme exception. And if you manage to achieve that in your life, then you're doing a great job. Most people aren't. And and most people are quite theoretical and ideological a lot of the times without realizing it, and a lot of the times without going in a way where they really think through like those kind of original ideas and kernels of truth and insights that just haven't been connected. Those dots haven't been connected in any kind of like useful way. And if they have, then they've stayed in one recalcitrant position and they haven't gotten through a variety of perspectives. And if they have done that, then they're usually cherry picking and kind of just taking little bits and pieces from all of these things to kind of just pad out something that they already presume to be true, or whatever it is that they think that they need to say to fit in with the right crowd or whatever. And that honestly is very popular. And it's one of the kinds of problems or issues that can come up and that gives, theory a bad name. But, a lot of the things that people don't like about theory, it's really ideology they have a problem with, and I have a problem with their ideology too. We all have a problem with everyone else's ideologies. We just like our own. And the point of critique and theory is to be able to at least own your own if you're going to have one. But you got to know that it comes with negative human tendencies that are exacerbated by the ideology itself. So theory and critique in that sense can be a sort of corrective measure. I talked a little bit about my background, and I got a master's in critical theory, blah, 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 blah. I asked you all about your backgrounds in theory, and some of you shared that, and that was cool. There's something annoying about the academic scene is the cult of personality and the acolytes. There's a lot of LARPing. It's just really frustrating being around people who've never worked a day in their lives. It really is. And they think that what they're doing is so important. And it's just like, okay, well, that's kind of why I decided to not be in the university any longer and to work and live in a way where I am not going to be financially dependent on institutions or individuals for my thinking or my speech, because both are free from money. And that feels really good. And this is the first year that I've been doing that. And I've not been producing a lot of content because I've been working on my book and listening to a lot of books while chainsawing. But as we get going here, as I really get this started, hopefully we'll be able to do a bunch more of these episodes. And a bunch of you are going to be like, a year from now, you're going to come back to these episodes and you're going to be like, I forgot I listened to that. Oh my God. I forgot that's where I got that idea from. And oh my gosh, this is true. It really has been life-changing. There's so much here. And I'm just here to share that with you because I went into $60,000 of debt ultimately because I got addicted to and excited about philosophy and theory. And I think that it's not just navel gazing. And I suspect that it's actually important to, if we want to work towards a new symbolization, and a new symbolization meaning a new mode of life on this planet, not both for from a personal standpoint, but also from a larger one. If we want to do that, then theory is going to be an important piece of the puzzle, I suppose. We talked a little bit about Marx and how traditional Marxism and critical theory kind of developed, and how critical theory gets conflated with continental philosophy. And I guess, honestly, everything else is stuff we can talk about later. For now, I just really want to thank everyone who actually listened to this, even if just in part. Come back to it when you're interested. But for the people who listen to it all the way, like, oh my gosh, I hope you're excited to get going with this, because good times are ahead. There's exciting stuff coming. I don't want to keep just like acting like that, but it's true. I'm just like genuinely getting stoked now because my book's about to publish. I'm self-publishing, by the way. Something I thought I would never do. I always kind of was just like, oh, self-publishing. But for this book specifically, it just makes sense. And also, there's problems with the publishing industry as an industry. So we can talk about that later. But if you're trying to reach a larger audience, you obviously want to probably publish through a real publishing house, but I'm not trying to reach a large audience. This podcast and my book are for a small audience, and we're going to keep it that way for my life, for the rest of my life. So, because I really, when you're thinking you're speaking to a lot of people, it really makes it hard to think. It really makes it hard to get anything done, and it makes it hard to grow. And so, trying to just work with people in my life while preparing to write to people who will be 25 and how do I say this? I am preparing over the next 5 years to write to people who will be 25 in 30 years. I'm writing to an audience that is not born yet. I am preparing to write for an audience that will be 25 in 30 years, because I believe we will still exist then. And if we still exist then, we're going to have to do things different. And I can't say what that will look like because I have only just begun myself. So if you think we don't have time for theory, my response to that is I don't think we have time to act like we don't have time. Because if we don't have time, then we really don't have time to act like we don't have time. Because that, I do believe, is one of the most important kinds of distinctions between maturity and immaturity. I do believe immaturity means constantly thinking only in the moment or in the short term. And like I said, crises in a state of war can justify that, but also war itself has dominated history and has reduced everything to its own ends. And so we're not going to get out of something we've been stuck in for thousands of years by continuing on thinking we don't have time to think. And with that, everybody, I want to thank you for joining. Take care. Peace. Oh yeah, make sure to subscribe to theoryplebe.com. That's where you'll get updates about when new episodes go up, when new streams are happening, when I'm publishing a book, stuff like that. Also, when I'm doing events in real life, that's where you'll know. I'm not going to be putting that just out on social media. Only people in my email list will be in the know. So if you want to come to a conference that I will organize within the next couple of years, you're going to have to subscribe to theoryplebe.com. Take care. Oh yeah, Black Flag audiobooks. Thank you. Check out that channel too, everybody. All right, peace.